Hello and welcome. I'm a man called J and you are watching AILTV. Now in this video, we are going to talk about the events that has taken place in West Africa. And this is ECOWAS lifting the sanctions on Niger, Burkina Faso, and Mali. But of course, it is not me who is going to be talking about it. We have got our man Temitope Olodo, who will be diving into this conversation. So let us dive in. Yes, we are talking West Africa, ECOWAS. Now, without wasting much of your time, here is Mr. Temitope Olodo.
Thank you for having me again.
Yes.
Well done, sir. Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, you know we have been on this trail. I don't know why we are so much attracted to West Africa. Is it because there is so much going on in West Africa rather than South or North or the Horn of Africa? What is it exactly that there is so much happening in West Africa? So what do you have for us today?
Okay, thank you so much again for having me. We are talking of a population of 425 million. And these three countries, who are country-locked countries, contribute roughly about, let's say, 10% of the GDP and 17.5% of the market. So it's a very, very important region. And unfortunately, there have been lots of coup because we thought coup was an issue of the past. That militaries are meant to stay in the barracks and civilians are meant to be ruling. So, in a democratic system. But unfortunately, we saw a series of coup d'etat that happened, and the West African bloc decided, to frown against it. However, the story is that these three countries that have been involved, or their leadership, the military leadership, have been a bit more stubborn. We're talking of Mali, we're talking of Niger, we're talking of Burkina Faso. And they've been very, very stubborn in the sense that every attempt, to block them and put sanction of them, economy sanction, running into millions of dollars that have been lost, these guys remain static and decide not to, play balls. That has created a lot of fraction or friction, if that's the right word to use. Recently, some couple of weeks ago, they decided to simultaneously, announce, to the public that they're going to come out of ECOWAS, alleging that ECOWAS was playing to their colonial masters, playing balls. And this is where the problem is. Most coups in Africa is always deemed and continue to remain undemocratic anywhere in the world. But in a situation where the citizens are running on the street jubilating that the colonial master is being kicked out, not actually the civilian that is ruling them, but actually that is most of these countries that have been involved are French-speaking countries. And there seems to be a conflict with France. So they're seeing it more as if they're not kicking out their civilian president, but more or less kicking out France or the French government out of French people, out of their way of life. That is where the dilemma is for ECOWAS, and that is what has been the catalyst to this dramatic incident that we witnessed less than 24 hours ago, where ECOWAS decided to do something that nobody was expecting, came out of the blue, and decided that on humanitarian grounds, they are going to lift the sanctions against those three countries that we're talking about.
Times like this, currently, we face in our sub-region demand that we take difficult but courageous decision that put the plight of our people at the center of our deliberations. This is why we must re-examine our current approach to the quest for constitutional order in 4 of our member states.
He also reaches out to the military leaders in the 4 countries.
I therefore urge them to reconsider the decision of these 3 nations to exit our home and not to perceive our organization as the enemy. Of course, we are not the enemy.
So, I know I came in too quick actually to play the chairman for the ECOWAS because this is what he said when they were lifting these sanctions. Was it about 2, 3, or 4 days ago? Now the question is, why does he even mention the word enemy? Why? I'm having difficulty to understand that. Maybe you could expand on that a bit?
Yes, President Tinubu is known as a gentleman from the southwest of Nigeria, where words are very, very important to them. You know, words means a lot to the Yoruba race. And for him to have used, he played the 2 words there, or he made 2 statements there that were very profound. He said that you have to take into consideration the people in ECOWAS, the voice of the people in ECOWAS. Is it that the president is saying, and the chairman of ECOWAS, that they are listening to these words on the street, that actually the coup d'etat, even though it's not democratic, is what the people of these 3 ECOWAS countries really, really want, because they really want to kick out the French. And that has been the debate here. That is part of the reason why it's been very difficult, for ECOWAS to take the decision that they wanted to take, which was to actually go into this country and remove them. I think it's important for students of history to remember that when Gambia had a similar situation, and the problem was brewing, Nigeria actually offered, to send ships, warship, closer to Gambia and invade their airspace, because they didn't want anything to do, with undemocratic practices. But the situation in these 3 countries seems to be different. Now, those 3 leaders leading those 3 countries in question have made an accusation that the ECOWAS were walking to the tune, or dancing to the tune, of their colonial masters. In other words, they were becoming the enemy, and they used the word that they were acting contrary to the principles of the founding father, and doing things that are contrary to what the people want. So it was important for the president of Nigeria and the chairman of ECOWAS to reinforce, the notion that we are not enemies, we are brothers. What you have done is wrong, and what we're trying to do is correct it. And from the speech they have made, or from the declaration, they've asked for the release of the president, which is what you will expect, and come up with a reasonable timetable. Now, we know that some of the juntas have said things around 3 years. Will ECOWAS be willing to wait for 3 years? Is that reasonable for any government? Of course, maybe 1 year and a half, maybe 1 year from now, because they've been there for a couple of months. But to say they want to do 3 years, I don't think the ECOWAS bloc will accept that 3 years. And I think that is where the balance will come and the negotiation, And, he said something about humanitarian. So we need to look at it, because I know that for those that have listened to that speech, some of the reasons they gave was that the month of Ramadan is fast approaching. And these are countries that are mainly Muslim countries, who, their people are already in their need of humanitarian support. And for them to be fasting in a period where there is, complete blockage would go against the tenets of, will not look good for the Muslim countries. And that's the reason why that's the reason they've given, humanitarian reason they've given for lifting this sanction at this time.
So now, the emphasis, when I was looking at how they have come up with the lifting of the sanctions, the emphasis is on Niger.
The authority has resolved as follows. Release of President Bazoum. The authority calls for the immediate release of His Excellency Mohamed Bazoum, former President of the Republic of Niger.
So, you see, to my understanding, in some media outlets, it suggests that Bazoum was released. So, what do you know about this?
I've seen I've heard about it, but there's no concrete information. We know that his son was recently released, but we've not heard anything about him being released. It will be quite good if he's released, because that will help to dice down some of the tension. But I think it's important to also recognize that Nigeria is a key factor in ECOWAS, and Nigeria have been having serious problem at home on the issue of invading Niger. Because in fact, the argument was that some of the operations or the planned operation to invade those countries, invade Niger in particular, was released, because there are people within the Nigerian, leadership that see Niger as more or less an annex of Nigeria, because they cross over to that part of the world, or to Niger, where they even have houses there, or they have cousins, they have family members, and they see it that fighting Niger is as if they are fighting their own blood brother. And that is why it has been very difficult for the Nigerian government to reach a decisive decision on whether to invade Niger or what to do with Niger. Niger has become a catch-22 for them, because in fact, when that discussion was ongoing about invading Niger, there were people that actually came out publicly to say that if Nigeria should get involved, there will be fire, and that is part of the challenge that the president of Nigeria had to tackle with, how to juggle that ball of, not allowing Niger to continue with the lawlessness, which you could, not to allow constitutional order to be allowed, and yet to be able to ensure that Niger is kept in, which is what they are doing now, to say you should reconsider your position of leaving ECOWAS, because if you leave ECOWAS, there's a lot of negatives. It's not going to be beneficial to you from an economic perspective, in your war against terrorism, in your irrigation, in your farmland, because there's a lot of projects that are ongoing, and those three countries, whether we like it or not, will be isolated. Of course, we know Russia is trying to get involved, with the private security, private military company that is going in, within from Russia, all those things. But yet, even with that, to move from a 15 member country to become 3 countries that is interlocked, landlocked, is going to be quite difficult for them to be able to navigate it. And we see what is happening in the UK now, even with our exit from Europe, and how that is adversely affecting us as a nation.
So, but you see, now as things stand, now the sanctions have been lifted. Now it looks like these 3 countries here Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso, it looks like they stood their ground. They were not ready. No. They were ready to actually leave ECOWAS completely. So does that make ECOWAS weak or stronger?
There are two schools of thought. One school of thought says that ECOWAS should have stood their grounds and make sure that these two countries, if they live, suffer, and are, dealt with, until they become a civilian, return back to civilian rule. But there are another school of thought that says actually bringing them on board is the best solution to the problem, because as we speak now, flying to Nigeria has become gold dust, because most of the country have to fly to Niger. Niger is a big country, and you have to, and with Nigeria locking them, putting no ban zone and things, planes have to travel a longer distance, to be able to avoid that airspace, because they too then lock their airspace against. So if you're coming, you have to now come, avoid Mali, avoid Burkina Faso, and come down. So it's become really, really a very challenging, time, for West Africa. But saying that, when you look at the economic benefit that both Niger, Mali, and Burkina Faso enjoys, and the kind of large market that they are open to for their people, it's going to be quite difficult for them to say they want to leave. Of course, these are military people, and they don't give monkeys what really happened to their citizens. But it's their citizens that are suffering. They are getting their 3 square meal, and they are able to do a lot of things. Of course, their money is blocked overseas, and there's a lot of things happening to them. But that being said, Nigeria has been in a similar situation where the world shut its door against us because of military. But the militaries were enjoying themselves and doing what they want to do. That's the military way of life. So I don't think it will have been beneficial to them. I don't think, yes, the feathers, ECOWAS need to clean the egg off their face for putting sanctions and removing the sanctions themselves. But if you speak to ECOWAS leaders, they will say what they've done is humanitarian. They try to help people, help the country. That's why they're not the enemy of the country, but actually, help them. And there are times when your son might have committed an offense and you want to kick him out of the house. And you said, don't come back into this house until you do this A, B, C, and D. And the child will insist that, no, I'm not going to do it. And that day you will not just say, leave him out there to suffer. You say, you know what, I'll bring him in and I'm going to deal with him at the right time when things return back to normal. But let him come out first. Let's get him out of the rain. Let's get him into clean clothes. Let's get him back to his senses. Because now, when two elephant fight, is the grass, that will suffer. That is what is happening here. It's the citizens of ECOWAS that are going to suffer from this incident. More importantly, the citizens of Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso. But bringing them back in, I've seen video clips now of people jubilating that they're coming back, because some of them have not been able to do some work coming to Africa and the other 13 countries or 12 countries to come and do their trading and things like that. All those things have been removed. All the financial banks are turn their back against them. So it's a serious issue. But thank God this issue have now been resolved. Hopefully they will respond back in a positive way, release the president, and give a reasonable timetable for things to move forward.
But do you think the African Union had a hand to play in these matters, or this is entirely on ECOWAS alone?
I think a lot of people have been getting involved, but I think they did highlight and spotlight Yakubu Gowon, who was a former general in Nigeria, retired general, and former head of state. And they've been involved in a lot of peace negotiation, even with the elections in Nigeria and things like that. And I think people like that being military to military, will be able to speak to those people to say, you know what, we can't win this fight, but more importantly, you ECOWAS need to meet this, what do you call it, spoiled brats along the line. Meet them halfway so that we'll be able to get what we want. What do you want? Is it not the release of the man and for them to return back to civilian rule? They will return back. Let's try and see, speak sense to them and at least open the channel for conversation. If they say they want 3 years, you can reduce it to 2 years. At least one way or the other, you are achieving your goal little by little. And I think that is that reasoning that has prevailed in these circumstances.
But actually, having said that, you have just touched on a civilian rule. In their demands, that condition is not actually there. All they have said, we are lifting the embargoes on air travel, banking systems, business, and everything. But they did not actually say whether they have given these 3 countries a time to hand over back the power to civilians.
They actually said that they should come up with a reasonable timetable. So we can infer that what they meant by that is that they should give them a reasonable timetable for transitioning back to civilian rule. Most analysts will jump to that conclusion. So we'll wait and see what the reaction, because it's now more up to 24 hours, and yet there'll be no reaction from those juntas. So we need to hear from them, and that will determine the way forward on this matter.
You see, what is also very interesting, we've been talking, we talked about Western interference in African affairs. So this is very, very important. If ECOWAS have lifted the sanctions, not even having the advice from the West, that could be a very good thing. That means the Africans can now solve these matters themselves.
And I think it's very important that Africa starts to adopt African approach to resolving issues. We know that the 37th summit of the African Union leaders meeting took place recently in Addis Ababa, and instead of them talking about the continental connectivity, Burundi is having argument with this Congo. Congo is having argument here. South Africa is talking of even exiting, the South African bloc. So there's a lot going on within the continent that we really need to look into. And this is not the time for war, because a lot of people are hungry. People are looking at having 3 square meals on their table, and they're not interested in this politics, of people trying to boys, playing on the playground and throwing toys at each other. That's not what the people want. People want food on their table, and they want a situation where their life will be improved. And I don't think this is the right time for a lot of conflict to continue within the African continent.
Actually, you have mentioned something good there, very important. I know I pressed the wrong button and I went into a different scene altogether. Now, you said a couple of days ago, it could be 3 days or 2 days ago, when the African Union had, again, a sitting, you said instead of discussing interconnectivity, they're actually discussing troubleshooting the problems. We know there are problems in Congo, there are problems in Cameroon, there are problems in Rwanda, there are problems in Ethiopia. So, but then again, people keep talking about that Africa, we have to unite, yes, it's a very good concept of uniting Africa. But then again, how do we come to this idea of uniting, or what don't we get, we as African people? Yeah.
I think there is a challenge that Africa is a young nation, a young continent, We can say, even without statistics, that at least 60 or 50% of African youth or of African population, their age fall below 40 years old. Yet it is the same leaders that are being recycled, most of them since independence or the early 70s, recycling themselves. And African youth are standing up to say, you know what, enough of these old bags. We need the new blood. We need people coming in. And that's why we're seeing conflict here and there. And what we need to do now is start looking at inward, to start looking at using African expertise to resolve African issues. And that is where I think we'll be going into within this decade.
Yeah, by the way, because we've been talking about only the three countries, there is another country which was sanctioned, and that is Guinea. Probably we might touch that a little bit, but I'm sure we are going to revisit this topic because we would like to know from here, where does ECOWAS go when it comes to Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso, and of course Guinea. So
Definitely.
yes, this Guinea, and as we understand, the president, Doumbouya, he sacked the entire cabinet and replaced it with the new people. So how do you see this game going? Because now, if these guys, they said we are leaving, and they have been brought back in. You know what we don't know? Did ECOWAS persuade Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso to come back, or it is the other way around?
I wish I was a fly in the room that could capture that moment. But I believe that there have been backdoor channels that have been left open for engagement with those people through people in the likes of Obasanjo, all these are leaders, Gowon and leaders from other African Union and African countries. But I think the point there is that there is an issue, and the issue is that most of the French-speaking countries are the ones that are adversely affected by this situation. So there's a grassroots mobilization, on this matter, and the youth have taken the laws into their hands to say, no, we don't want French, we don't want this, and these military people are playing on that sentiment, and Africa leaders need to be careful to make sure that they are not doing things that is contrary to the will of the people that don't want the French, dealing with their affairs.
Okay, so we have covered all that. Now I think we're going to wrap up. We know in our private conversations, we have been talking about food security. We are just going to talk about this. This is going to lead us into our next program, which we'll do probably next week. Maybe we might even have a food expert. Just give us an insight on this issue of food security. How does Africa understand food security?
The challenge we have is that there are different approaches adopted across Africa with regard to food policy or food security, if that's the word to use. We're talking of a continent that still has about 75% of land that has not even been cultivated, across Africa. So it is ironic and paradox that Africans are suffering from food security when there's abundance of land. And there are different reasons for that. There might be poor infrastructure, and a lot of lack of storage system for farm produce, insecurity. Those are the drivers of violence, extremism that is actually affecting, affecting our agricultural output as a continent. And there must be a kind of a conversation across Africa where leaders are joining heads together to come up with suitable, policy to enhance our agriculture.
Well, Mr. Tope
Yes,
Olodo,
sir.
we are going to revisit this food security issue because some people cannot understand the continent of Africa. 75% of its land is arable land,
Yeah.
and people produce food. Yet we say there is no food in Africa. And yet there is a report written somewhere, and this was about 2 years ago. They are saying the food and beverage sector in Africa right now is worth 300 million, no? Yes, $300 million. Just, from like what you see, the likes of McDonald's and whatever, takeaway stuff. And when you go to Africa, you find these funky restaurants which are not owned by Africans, but they're earning that much money. And yet the food they're actually having in their restaurants, it's all produced in Africa. So why do we get this report that there is no food in Africa? Is that some form of propaganda again to keep people thinking that Africa is always is hunger?
I think the challenge is implementation and storage issue that we have in Africa. It's not like you go to the market, you see fresh food there, but there's no storage. Those people are not taking those food like in the UK where you put it in your freezer for 10 years and it's still there. Bottom line is they don't even have capacity, electricity in a place like Nigeria. It's completely zero. So how do you keep your food? You have to pay for generator to warm to put on light in your house. So those are part of the challenges that we need to address, and it's not just Nigeria alone, but across Africa continent we have the resources and capacity to deliver, but we're unable to deliver, and we need to start asking questions on that.
Okay, so you see, all these things are interlinked because when
Yes, it
you
is.
look at the ECOWAS duty was actually to solve those problems, including security, food security, and how do you call it, community cohesion. So now ECOWAS is actually now troubleshooting issues that when it shouldn't even be there. So what do you think the future of ECOWAS is? Then we
At
then
the
we go
moment,
off. Mhm.
at the moment, their thinking is that if they could storm over, they could get through this storm of those three countries wanting to leave, then Africa, West Africa will continue to enjoy, enjoy ECOWAS. But the bottom line is the 425 million, you know, ECOWAS citizens need a better service than what they are getting at the moment. And that's the reason why they really need to come up with effective policies and plans, that will help them to be able to ensure safety, security, and free movement of their people, and an opportunity for them to excel themselves.
So Temitope Olodo, as always, words of wisdom and understanding. So we will see you in another video. Yes. So that was Temitope Olodo. And as usual, he delivers. So you can see the challenges that ECOWAS is actually having. But we are going to come back. We are going to be digging deep. We want to see where the situation is Is it getting worse or is it getting better? We will soon find out. The sanctions are lifted, yes. But then we will come back with another question. That question is not known yet. Until another time, stay tuned. You're watching a man called J, and this is Africans in London TV.